sea, billows his will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me.
Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this good day that we have come together to study your word. Father, we thank you for Wayne, for the knowledge that he has. Chris, good job that they do. Father, we just ask that you be with all of our seed, be with ones, our neighbor, be with us through the day. Father, ask that you be with our country this time. The troublesome times that we have. We look to you, only you. Father, we thank you for the wisdom that's going our way. Father, just be with all of us, everything that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're going to be talking, as you see the title up there today, about Jesus and the Passover. I want to say this. It's good to see everyone here this morning. Hubert slipped in on us. Man, I thought you were playing hooky today. Have to pick on Hubert. It's better to be pickable than despicable, though, right? Okay, Jesus and the Passover. Okay, the Jewish holiday of Passover commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. You go back into the book of Exodus, and when God was preparing the people there, you remember they put the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, or the headpiece, you might say, that supports the top of the door. And when the angel of the Lord came over Egypt, all the houses that had the blood on the doorpost and over the door, those people were spared. But the Egyptians obviously didn't do that. And so the firstborn, not only of the humans, but of everything they had, died. And that was called the Passover, because God passed over the houses that had obeyed his command and followed his instructions. And so God told them to commemorate this. And we're going to look at how they did. But then Jesus, in his day, you remember the Last Supper he had was celebrating the Passover, and it was during that he instituted the memorial service that we perform every first day of the week. And we take that the first day of the week because we find in the scriptures that's when they were taking it. Acts 20:7, when upon the first day of the week the disciples came together to break bread. And the breaking of bread there was not just eating. It was celebrating the death, the burial, and resurrection of Christ. Then when we get over into Paul's writings, 1 Corinthians, he talks about how that some were abusing the Lord's Supper. But that has become like the Christian's Passover. That's been referred to by several gospel preachers in the past as the Christian Passover. And that Jesus is the Paschal Lamb, or the Passover Lamb. So let us look this morning, and hopefully we can understand. Now, I may have taught this lesson once before here. I don't know. If I do, I'll be like the Apostle Peter and say this will put you in remembrance of some things, in case you might have forgotten something. But the Jewish holiday of Passover then commemorates the Exodus from Egypt. The roots of the festival are found in Exodus chapter 12, in which God instructs the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb at twilight on the 14th day of the Jewish month of Nisan. Before the sun sets, this is Exodus chapter 12, verse 18. That night the Israelites are to eat the lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The lamb's blood should be swabbed on their doorposts as a sign, and also on the lintel, if you'll go back and read that. So it's not just the doorpost, but across the top. And this was a sign. God, seeing the sign, will then pass over the house of the Israelites, Exodus 12:13, while smiting the Egyptians with the 10th plague, the killing of the firstborn. And so there was a lamb that had to be sacrificed in each family. They had to sacrifice a lamb, and that was part of the Passover meal that they would have. So the lamb was very important. So we're going to read now from Exodus 12. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. So the Passover then, when all of this takes place, that's like month and day number 1 of the Jewish calendar. Number 2, this month shall be unto you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for a house. So each household had to provide their own lamb. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbors next unto his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make you your count for the lamb. So if the families were small and maybe poor and didn't have a lamb, they would get together with some neighbors and they would celebrate together. Verse 5, your lamb shall be without blemish. So you couldn't pick out the scrubbiest, runniest lamb in the bunch. You pick out the best one you have. And he shouldn't have a scar on him anywhere, shouldn't have any kind of mark. So your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. So it couldn't be more than a year old. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. And ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. So everybody had to do the same thing, and then at this time in the evening, the twilight, they would kill the lamb and perform what God had said. So here is a painting of a Jewish man applying blood over the door, that's the lintel, and on the doorpost on either side they would have the blood. And it didn't say paint the whole thing, solid, just said put the blood on there, and that was a sign. And then here's another illustration that someone painted. That looks like a little Egyptian boy standing there looking, wondering what's going on. But that was the sign that God was looking for. Then verse 7, and they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two sides, side posts, and on the upper doorposts, or we'd say the lintel of the house, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in the night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat it not of it raw, or eat not of it raw, nor sodden, in other words, boiled, at all with water, but roast with fire, his head with his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. So you just roast the whole thing, and then you take what you don't eat out. And ye shall let nothing of it. Well, hopefully they took the intestines out. And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. So if you can't eat it all, then you've got to burn it. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hands, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. In other words, every time they've got to sort of reenact what they were preparing for when they came out of Egypt. He told them to gather up their stuff, and they were going to have to leave in haste. And so that's the significance. Remember, we talked about the significance of the shoes and how that in a lot of places they took their shoes off. They were required to, but it was an act of reverence toward God. But here God tells them to keep their shoes on. See, because he says, eat it in haste, and you're going to leave in haste. That's what he's saying. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now here, and Brother Hubert wants me at some point, I think, to address about the God and the gods. See, he's saying the gods of Egypt. He's using this in an accommodative term, because the Egyptians, they have all of these idols that they worship and these animals, and they refer to them as gods. And so God here is using accommodative language. There is only one God, and we know that from various passages sort of sprinkled throughout the Old and New Testament. So there's only one living God. All of the others are idols, and they're referred to sometimes as dumb idols because they can't speak. They can't do anything but just sit there. You remember the story about when the Ark of the Covenant was taken into the Philistine temple, and there was Dagon, their chief god. And that night he fell down on the floor before the Ark of the Covenant. Well, the priests understood, hey, something's wrong with this. It's like Dagon's worshiping the God of Israel. And then they set it back up. Some says, well, maybe it just happened by chance, maybe it was an accident. Maybe there was a small earthquake, toppled him over. So they stand him back up. The next night, you remember, his hands and his feet are broken off. He falls across the threshold of the temple and breaks his hands off. Well, see, the hands are gone now. That's a symbol of he's rendered powerless. And so the Philistines got the message. They understood what was going on after that. But you see, they learned that he was not a real God. He's just an idol. And that the God of Israel has power. He does things. So when they use this term here against the gods of Egypt, he's using that as an accommodative term. That's how the Egyptians would have thought. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial. See, here God is saying, you're going to have to remember this. A memorial is something that you remember. And that's what the Lord's Supper, that's when Jesus said, as often as you do it in remembrance of me. He's saying this is a memorial. You remember. So ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. So not just, this is not a one-time thing. You're going to do this every year. On the same day of the month, you're going to do this every year. And so he goes on to say then, ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep a feast of it by ordinance forever. In other words, as long as my covenant stands with you, you keep doing it. Well, remember, God's covenant with the Jews was replaced when Jesus was nailed to the cross, and so that's in the future. We're going to get to that. Okay, verse 7. 7 days ye shall eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your house, and whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the seventh, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. In other words, if you find out somebody was eating leavened bread during this 7-day period, he's to be ostracized. He's to be exorcised. He's going to be put out of the mainline part of the community. So God was very strict on this. And you know why the leaven, they didn't have time to make bread and let it rise. This was happening so quick. And so they ate unleavened bread. But we know in our thinking, when we take the Lord's Supper, it's unleavened, and it does, in a symbolic way, represents the body of Christ that never sinned, never had any imperfections. And so, but everything that we're seeing here, the leavened bread, you're leaving fast, eat your meal quickly, keep your shoes on, all of that is saying, when the Egyptians wake up in the morning and all the firstborn are dead, while they're mourning and they're in turmoil, you're getting out of Egypt. So that was the idea. Okay, so he said what they didn't eat, he mentioned up there, it had to be burned. They had to eat unleavened bread 7 days. And if you don't do that, God says he'll be cut off from Israel. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and in the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation to you. Okay, he says, no manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat. That only may be done of you. So during this 7-day period, they're not to do anything except eat and just honor God. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore ye shall observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. See, that's twice now God said it's an ordinance forever. In other words, this is a law that I have established with you. That's what an ordinance is. It's a directive, an official directive, and he says forever. Well, forever in the Bible is not the same as eternal. In other words, it means until this covenant or this thing, it lasts until this. Because the Jews, otherwise, they'd still be having to kill that lamb and celebrate the Passover, even in 2021 AD. But that was nailed to the cross. Paul tells us in Ephesians 2 and Colossians 2 and a lot of other passages, but those are really main passages trying to tell us the old law came to an end. It was nailed to the cross when Jesus died on the cross. Okay, so let's see. Ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this, I read that, the last verse here. In the first month of the 14th day of the month at even, or that would be twilight or whatever, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month. So from the 14th day to the 20th day, and if you count the 14th day and the 20th day, that makes how many days? 7, doesn't it? So you got 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th. So that makes 7 days. If I didn't have my fingers, I couldn't count. Okay, in the book of Exodus, God helped the Israelites escape from slavery in ancient Egypt by inflicting 10 plagues upon the Egyptians before the Pharaoh would release the Israelite slaves. The last of the plagues was the death of the Egyptian firstborn. The Israelites were instructed to mark the doorposts of their homes with the blood of a slaughtered spring animal or lamb. And upon seeing this, the Spirit of the Lord knew to pass over the firstborn in these houses. Hence the English term, hence the English day or name for the holiday, Passover. The Greek word was Pascha, and everywhere in the Bible that word Pascha appears. If it was in the Greek version of the Old Testament or the New Testament, it was always translated Passover until King James come along in 1611, and he told his translators, keep this translation ecclesiastical. And they realized they didn't have a place for Easter in there. That was a big celebration by the Catholics and the Anglican Church. And so they go back, and there in the book of Acts, when it says it was on Easter, the King James translators put that there to keep it ecclesiastic. Guess what the word is in the Greek Bible? It's Pascha, Passover. And so the Greeks had a word for Passover. We say it's a Passover. And the Jewish people who speak English today, a lot of them refer to it, I guess, accommodatively for us, Passover. But they also call it something else. Does anybody remember what the Jews call this day? Yom Kippur, the Day of Remembrance. But it's also, it's the day when the priest, under the law of Moses, sprinkled the blood on the mercy seat in the Holy of Holies. And it was like he put those sins off and wouldn't remember them again until next year on that day. So the Day of Remembrance is also the Day of Atonement, isn't it? Because God remembers it, the priest goes in, puts the blood on the mercy seat, and God has promised that he would remember those sins no more until the next time. You see, every year they had to keep, the old expression by a lot of our old gospel preachers was rolling the sins forward for another year. In a sense, that's a good term. God put it off for another year. But if they didn't do what they were supposed to do, he remembered those, and they would face retribution. So it was a day of atonement. It was a day of remembrance, all of those things. And so the Passover was, God turned it into that after he delivered them out of Egypt. Okay, let's look at, I've already shown one illustration of this. This is a different one though, and but it shows them putting the blood on the lintel and the doorpost. Exodus 12:19. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your house. So not only could they not have it in their bread, they couldn't even have it in the house. Because see, that was a symbol of impurity for them. Even though unleavened bread was quickly made and, as a symbol of their leaving Egypt quickly, it also took on another reference. And that was impurities. Because God wanted the house, your house become almost like the temple. Sanctified, pure, and no impurities, nothing that didn't belong there. And so he's saying, get the leaven out of the house. I don't know where they put it. They had to keep leaven somewhere. Maybe they went out and maybe they had a little house standing away from that house. The Bible doesn't tell us, and archaeologists hadn't been able to explain it. But they had to get it out of the house. So 7 days. Does anybody have a question before I go back through this? Hubert? Sometimes it's used of God himself. God is a spirit. We're taught that. And sometimes it's used in that sense, but sometimes it might have been one of the archangels that he sent. But in this case, it's sort of like when Abraham, the three individuals came and visited Abraham. 2 of them go on to Sodom to warn Lot and his family. But Abraham continues to talk to who? To the Lord. And so it's almost like he appeared in, they call that, it's a big long word that you'd have to look up in the dictionary, anthropomorphism, which means to become like human form. And sometimes God took on like human form. He's described with hands and ears and things like that in different places, but he's a spirit. He really doesn't have that, but he can take on that form. And so I can't answer here if it was really God himself, but he does say, let's back up over here. In Exodus 12:13, and the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. So see there, it makes it sound like it was God himself. But to be honest about it, I couldn't say yes, that the Spirit of the Lord there, it sounds like it is. But sometimes it's used of a messenger of God instead of him. Okay, so let's see. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. I read that, I guess. Okay, we were looking at verse 21, or about to. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families, and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin. See, he even told them how to put this on. With what? And strike the lintel and the two side posts with the blood that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out at that door of his house until the morning. So once you put that blood on, nobody comes in or out. You stay in the house until morning comes, because something's going to be going on out here for all those folks that didn't put blood on their doorposts and lintel. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the two side posts, the Lord will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your house to smite you. So it's like the Lord and there's the destroyer. That's like two different people. Yeah.
Remember the Assyrians, 180,000 Assyrians, they were killed by the destroyer.
Exactly. So God may have a killing angel up there to take care of all the bad people. See, again, there's a whole lot, brothers and sisters, we don't understand about the angels. We can speculate a lot, but God, God is God. And he's got a whole host of heavenly beings up there that never turned against him. Do you remember Satan and a bunch of the angels turned against God? And you can read about that over in Jude. And how that they left their first estate, which was heaven, their habitation. They were put out. God put them out because they rebelled against him. And so there's a whole lot about angels we don't know and understand.
In Exodus 12:29, it says, "And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the captive."
Yeah. So there, it's saying that God smote them. And we don't know if he did that vicariously, other words, through another that was the destroyer. But that's what I'm saying. There's a whole lot about the angels and the spirits that we don't understand. God didn't choose to give us in on all the little secrets. We didn't, other words, we didn't have a need to know, I guess. In Exodus 12:24, "And ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons," third time now, "forever." Other words, don't let there come a time when you stop. Remember, the Apostle Paul tells us to pray without ceasing. He didn't mean that we have to pray 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He meant don't let there come a time in your life when you stop praying to God. Other words, don't quit. You pray, and then there's another time you pray, but don't stop praying. Don't let it come a time when you never pray to God again. That's what Paul is saying. Pray without ceasing. And God here is telling these people, don't stop it. In other words, you do this until there is no law of Moses again. Moses' law hadn't been instituted at this time, but it was going to be in just a few months. Okay, verse 25, "It shall come to pass when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service." So it's not just here in Egypt, because you're hightailing it out of Egypt quickly. And you're going to another land. But wherever you're at, You're going to celebrate this. Okay, verse 26, it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed their head and worshipped. And the children of Israel went away and did as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. And this is what Sister Laura was referring to. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. In other words, God was making a point. Now the skeptics today says, oh, that's so wicked of God to have killed the firstborn of all of those. Maybe the firstborn was a little baby, or even the prisoners that were in the dungeons. The firstborn of all of them died. And God was saying, look, I'm in charge. I made you, you belong to me, and I'm in charge. And you have to follow my way. You can't do it your way. Then in Joshua chapter 4, are there any questions or comments up to this point?
That's kind of weird. The first one, he could have been a 50-year-old male in the house.
Yeah,
He was still in the family.
exactly.
So it wasn't just little kids, and most likely it would have been more older than younger, but there would have been a lot younger.
And there's Chris, you may remember studying this in one of our classes there, but there was this dream stela that's a big column, like an obelisk that stands, I don't know, this thing might have been massive, because when kings and princes put up these monuments, sometimes they were real high. But Merneptah's stela, he had a dream that he was going to become Pharaoh. But he wasn't the oldest son. And that wasn't possible in their thinking, to become Pharaoh if you're not the oldest son. When the father dies, the oldest son becomes the king. But Merneptah had a dream that he would become king, or Pharaoh, and he did. And the Pharaoh that died fits the time, or the son that died, the firstborn, and in the book of Exodus. And Merneptah's time, they all overlap. And so it's believed that Merneptah came to the throne because of what happened right here. In other words, archaeologists have fit all of this to the same time, and it's pretty close to the time that this would have happened. Let us see what Joshua says. And Joshua said unto them, pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and ye shall take every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according unto the number of the tribes. In other words, each one, a member of each tribe, picks up a stone, and you carry it from the midst of the Jordan River over to the west side where we're crossing. And he says, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye by these stones? And here's a picture of a painting, like some artists had an idea of God leading them across. Then ye shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it passed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones shall be forever a memorial unto the children of Israel. So God wants his people to remember, brothers and sisters. He wanted us to remember, or he wanted the Jews to remember that Passover. And they were to celebrate it every year and remember what happened and why. And then when Joshua crosses the Jordan with the children of Israel, they set up this column of stones. And every time some Jewish family would come by with their children, they'd say, what do these stones mean? Then you tell them the story of how God brought you across the Red Sea on dry land. And then you tell them how God brought you across the Jordan River on dry land. You tell them that. That's a memorial. So God wants us to remember. So is it any wonder then that when Jesus dies and is buried and resurrected, before he did that, he instituted a memorial that would cause people to remember him and what he did, why and what and when, all of that. And then we find that the early church would do this. They remembered. And so Acts 20:7 is an example of that. And then Paul, we don't use this a lot to reflect back upon the Lord's Supper. But the first two verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, when upon the first day, I can't even quote it now. I'm trying to quote the memorial part from Acts 20:7. But he says, let everyone, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in stores God had prospered. And Paul gives a reason why. That there be no gatherings when I come. That I don't have to get out and round it up from house to house. But why did he say on the first day of the week? They were coming together on the first day of the week for something. Acts 20:7. They were coming together to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord with the Lord's Supper. Now, a lot of our religious friends say, oh, if you do it often, it don't mean anything. That's our problem up here, if it don't mean anything. God, we find that the early church did it, and we're condemned for forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, Hebrews chapter 10 there. And so we're commanded to come together. And the reason we're coming together is to, of course, edify one another, help build up one another. But we're also coming together on the first day of the week to remember the Lord's death, burial, and resurrection. And Jesus says, as oft as you do it in remembrance of me. So he was expecting them to do it often. Well, how often do we find the early church doing it? In the Bible, we find them coming together on the first day of the week. And even in the Roman writings, when Pliny the younger, he was a nephew of Pliny the elder, and he wrote about the Christians in Cappadocia, not Cappadocia, but Bithynia. And he was governor. And he says, every first day of the week, these people come together and they celebrate this feast in honor of this Christ. So even the Roman historians testified to the fact, and this was written between the year 110 and 112. We know that for a fact because that's exactly when Pliny was governor. Romans let their governors serve in one country 2 years. They moved them to another country to keep them from building up a big following and creating trouble for Rome. And so Pliny bears testimony to this fact. And then Justin Martyr, one of the Christian writers that wrote about 150 AD, he writes that every first day of the week they come together. And that he talks about them taking the Lord's Supper, and he says even the deacons were charged with taking the Lord's Supper to the shut-ins. So that's not a new thing. They were doing that 150 years after the birth of Christ. They were taking communion to the shut-ins. But God wants his people to remember, brothers and sisters. And I know our time, tell you what, this is going to be a two-part lesson. Let me see how many. Yep, this is going to be a two-part lesson. We're going to stop here. We're going to start with Hezekiah next time. And I'm going to put a slide there just so I don't go any further. Now then, are there questions or comments about, we've just talked about the how now. We haven't made the direct connection yet between that and Christ's time and the Lord's Supper and Christ being our Passover. Haven't made that connection yet. We'll do that, Lord willing, next week. Yes, sir.
So if
Yeah.
It was in every house, it was in every house.
Yeah, God didn't skip a house that didn't have the blood on the doorpost and the lintel.
It's sad how for one person, so many suffer on one.
Exactly. It was Pharaoh's stubbornness. Pharaoh could tell that Moses and Aaron were not ordinary people. And when they outdid his magicians, that should have been a message to him. Hey, these people are for real. These people are not from, they didn't just come out of the desert. They've got divinity behind them. And he knew that. But the more he resisted, he started out hardening his own heart. And then finally we find that God is hardening his heart. In other words, it's like God gave up on him and said, okay, old boy, if that's the way you want it, I'll make it easy for you. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, where God does give up on people. And he said he would send them strong delusions that they might believe a lie and be damned. And I think that's what he was finally doing to Pharaoh, just to prove that he was superior. See, Pharaoh was considered a god himself. All the pharaohs in Egypt were looked upon by their people as a god. He was like the son of Ra. Ra was the sun god, and he was the chief god. And all of these, that's why a bunch of them had the name Ra in their name. Ramesses, we say. And so they were looked upon as gods. Let's see. Brother James, I believe I ask you to lead us in a closing prayer. But are there any questions, anything that needs to be said? Miss Lisa, you got any, as the little boy says, announcements? Okay, Rosie's. That's not a garden, by the way. I believe that's a restaurant. Right? Okay. Brother James.
Father God, thank you for blessing us again to be here. So we split another portion of it. Thank you for bringing us to this class. We pray that things we learn here, we'll put them in our hearts. And thank you so much for sending your son, who we are not even word to see you forgive us this afforded us. We thank you so much for continuing to be with us, continue to bless us. Please forgive us our sins and bless us throughout this day. Bless these things in Christ's name.
Amen. Thank all of you for being here today. We're a little fewer in number, but as they say, this